Hi everybody, welcome back to another episode of Nearly Verified. My name is Matt Puglisi, and this is going to be episode 11 featuring the Laurier legend himself, Ken Jackson. So for those of you who do not know, Ken Jackson is an economics professor here at Laurier, where he teaches a range of econ classes from your beginner, micro, and macro classes to the economics of sports and economics of poverty as well. Ken has his undergraduate degree and PhD in economics from the University of BC and has also been with Laurier since 2008. On a more personal level, Ken is such a genuine and kind person to chat with. Something that I really wanted to learn from this chat was how he gained the skills to teach to literally 1,000 students at one time in one room, and actually keep them engaged and keep them learning throughout the entire time. I was blown away when I first experienced how he taught and his teaching style. It was really, really cool. So I just wanted to learn a little bit more about that. So I asked him a bunch of questions about how he gained those skills, how he, keeps in the right mindset and that sort of thing. So overall, for years, Ken has been such a positive influence on the Lazaridis School of Business and the Laurier students that have come and gone. I just want to say that from Laurier students and the Laurier community, it is amazing how much empathy Ken has shown, specifically to his first year students. He talks about in the podcast how he was not the best undergrad student and it took him a little bit longer, but when he's teaching, he's speaking to that student who may be struggling, who may not be fully grasping the concepts, and he does a little bit of maneuvering in the way that he teaches in order to speak to all types of students, and that's something that is really special about him. And overall, Ken, thank you so much for coming on the podcast to chat. It was an awesome conversation, and I hope you guys enjoy. Thanks. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of Nearly Verified. Today, I have the chance to interview a Laurier legend in Ken Jackson. He is an economics professor, among many things, and he's just a great guy. So, Ken, thank you so much for being here.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Of course. So outside being a professor and being an economist, I'm just wondering what makes Ken Jackson Ken Jackson?
Ooh, that's an interesting question. I should get other people to answer that one, but no. So when I'm not unrelated to work, I spend a lot of time coaching baseball. I coach softball. I coach water polo. So a lot of kids sports. Basically, my kids are 11 and 13 and are both involved in a lot of sporting activities. And partly, I think because of teaching, I'm not very good at sitting on the sidelines and just being a parent. I need to get involved, and so the one thing I do outside of this, probably more than anything, is coach kids sports.
That's awesome.
That keeps me going.
Did you play any sports growing up? Is that what kind of got you into it?
Yeah, I played. I played a variety of sports when I was younger. I played high school basketball, and then I played water polo through high school and university, basically. And that was the sport that I played at sort of a higher level than average, and got to go to nationals and that kind of stuff until I was about 20 or 21, and then I stopped playing.
Water polo is the most competitive.
Water polo was the highest level sport I played, yeah, for sure.
Okay, that's cool. So did you play that at the university level?
Yeah.
Okay. Nationals. So how did you guys do at nationals?
So I went to nationals 6 times. There's juvenile, 1700 nationals, 1900 nationals. I was on a winning team once, which was good. But BC was pretty competitive. So
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So I was actually curious about something. I've never been to BC. I've heard it's amazing. I heard it rains a lot.
No.
I know, I would love to. Maybe now, not the best time, but at some point I will definitely make my way. Yeah. So UBC, I've heard really good things. I'm just wondering how your experience was there and how that compares to maybe the student experience at Laurier.
So UBC and Laurier are about as different as universities can get in Canada. UBC is an enormous campus. It's all spread out. It has a huge commuter population. So my family lived about, a 10-minute drive from the campus. And so I lived at home all the way through university. And so you have a lot of people who live at home. There's not a huge amount of student involvement, I would say. But it's huge. It's spread out. There's forests, there's beaches, right on campus. And so it's about as different as a university could get. The biggest challenge at UBC was it was easy to do nothing. It's really easy to not get involved. And which I don't think is that's not as common at Laurier. I mean, there are students who choose not to get involved in things, but at Laurier, it's pretty easy to get involved if you want to. Whereas at UBC, you have to go to your way a little bit to try and get involved. Now, when I was at UBC, I solved that problem because I joined a fraternity in first year. I started working for intramural sports in second year, and I worked for campus organizations all the way through my time there. So I was pretty heavily involved that way, which is one of the reasons it took me 6 years to get an undergrad degree. But it's quite different in that sense, in that one of the things I really like about Laurier is the student experience is much better if you get involved, and it's just easier to do that on a campus like Laurier. Both the compactness of the campus helps with that, and just the general sort of campus environment is a little bit, I would say, a little bit more welcoming at Laurier than it was at UBC.
Very cool. And I completely relate to your point when you're saying it's very easy to get involved when it comes to Laurier and like the Laurier community. I came into Laurier with the mindset of, I am not going to do anything. I'm going to absolutely enjoy these 4 years, kick it, hang with my friends. That was my mentality because I was very involved in high school with Students' Union and stuff like that. I get to Laurier and it's the exact opposite of that. I'm like a part of every club, trying every student initiative possible. And if there are any first years listening, I would definitely recommend it 100% because it completely changes like the trajectory of your university career. You meet so many people, learn so many skills. And that's like the selling point of Laurier. I feel like it has to be, at least for the business program. It's
across the campus. It's not just business. Across campus, the Students' Union, the General Students' Union, Arts and Science have lots of organizational stuff to get involved in. And the best part about Laurier across the campus is the ability to get involved in all sorts of different things. Whatever you want, there's something going on for you.
Yeah. I actually remember, I think it was my second year, I had a role in the Students' Union and we were doing a president's training for all of the Students' Union clubs. And I could not believe how many clubs there are on this campus. Ping pong club, foosball club, knitting club. Like, it's just like anything that you could possibly care about or have an interest in, there's definitely something for you.
Good.
So I wonder how that's going to change now. Like, you can't quite play ping pong via Zoom, but hopefully they can figure something out.
I'm sure people have tried. But I think, we're not going to be in this world forever, and things will bounce back. And I think that there's going to be some things are going to start coming back over the winter, and I think that's hopeful.
Yeah, definitely. So my next question for you, kind of relating back to the business community at Laurier, is how would you like best describe the business community and the students at the Laz School of Business?
So, the business and economics students collectively, we have an excellent set of students. There's a lot of diversity in the student body from what I've seen, both, in all dimensions, but particularly that level of involvement, that level of engagement, those level of interests. And I think that's really useful because it lets students can sort of find their own place in the community. I think that, one of the nice things, and I've talked to lots of people who teach first year economics in lots of different universities. And the one thing about the Laurier students, and it's partly got to do with the structure of the BBA and the economics programs, but our first year students are incredibly motivated. Partly it's because you guys all want to get into co-op, which I fully accept, and extrinsic motivation is a thing and it's useful, but the students tend to be very motivated. They want to do well in school, and it's true it's true in a normal year. It's true in this remote year. I'm seeing the same thing. And that makes it really, to be honest, it makes it really easy for me as an instructor. If the students want to do well, I can work with them to get them there. And if students don't care, it's really hard to get past that. But that's not been my experience at Laurier. We get students who care about economics, for example, for different reasons. Some are just about the grade. Some of them, they're really interested in business. They're really interested in economics. They're really interested in something. It doesn't, to some extent for first year, it doesn't matter why they're interested. It's just that they're motivated in the first place. And it's really easy to work with. Beyond that, I think it's that, I think the one thing is, I think it's part of that Laurier culture of the students want to get involved and they want to be able to get involved in all sorts of things. And there's sort of this expectation that everything's going to work. And for the most part it does. So.
Yeah. 100%. And I really like your point when you say if they're willing to learn, if they want to learn, regardless of their intentions, like that, you can definitely work with that. And I think that's something that, I guess, from the student point of view, like we really appreciate. And that's why you have such a good buzz around campus, because you have a lot of empathy for your students, which in the like university setting, not necessarily like Laurier, but just in general, you can have a lot of professors that maybe don't have that same level of empathy and don't care for their students' growth and development as much, especially in first year. It is like, it's daunting walking into LH1001. For context, I think the largest lecture hall on our campus, probably 800 seats, maybe?
Seats 1,000.
1,000. So, side note, I'd actually been meditating on this idea of interviewing you for like over a year, or well, the podcast in general, but interviewing you for over a year. And I had this really cool idea. We're going to be sitting up on the LH1001 stage, empty lecture hall, and then it would cut to clips of you teaching like this huge group of students. It was going to be really cool. Unfortunately, can't make that happen, but
can't make that happen.
I just think, to bring it full circle, students really, really enjoy taking your class, and they feel motivated because you care. So on behalf of students, thank you for caring.
Well, I appreciate that. I mean, one of the things that, first of all, I think, and this is something the school does really well, is, and this is actually across the university from what I've seen, is the university is really good at putting instructors in first year classes who want to be in first year classes. Now, I mean, I don't think it's not true in every first year class, but Laurier's got a really strong commitment to that undergrad population. And so in business, you get Sophie and Laura and Leanne, James Moore. You get people who want to be in front of a first year class, and they've chosen to be there. And I think that's really important. You don't see it at every university. There are lots of universities out there where the first year class is just the last thing that we fill out with, okay, who's left over who needs to teach a class, or who can we find to teach a class? And whereas at Laurier, in my experience, almost every department that I've talked to, they almost always start with, okay, who's going to teach first year? Because that's the starting point. And so that's a pretty common thing across the university.
That's awesome. I actually was chatting with one of my coworkers at Prism, and he had a question for you. And his question was, why do you choose to teach first year? Like, what's your motivation there?
So, I mean, I think there's two parts to it. One is I enjoy it. So I'm someone, I get really nervous presenting in front of people. Okay.
Really?
I've been doing it for years. Classes of 300. I mean, when I started at Laurier, I had classes of 50 because I wasn't teaching first year. But I get really nervous teaching in front of people, but I also there's a buzz off of teaching 500 people at once. And I mean, in economics, we teach about comparative advantage. And in terms of, I mean, relative to my colleagues, I think I'm more comfortable in that environment. I enjoy it. I get a lot of, I mean, there's a high out of teaching 500 people at a time. And the other part of it is, okay, I was a terrible undergrad student. Okay, my grades would not have kept me in the BBA program. They wouldn't have kept me in the economics program. I might have graduated eventually, but I wouldn't have done particularly well. And so I can empathize with that experience of coming into first year, not really knowing what you want to do or where you want to go. And so the student is really motivated, is easy to teach, but I'm actually really interested to teach a student who's not super motivated, as hopefully they're a small fraction of the class, but trying to figure out how to reach that student, I find is a challenge that I enjoy. So that's one of the reasons that I do that I really like teaching first year. But to be honest, I've taught second year. Actually, I've never taught a second year class. I've taught third year classes, fourth year classes, grad classes. They all have their special points. I've gravitated a little bit towards teaching the first year class, but I've also been teaching the third year sports economics class the last couple of years, and that's been a lot of fun. I've taught the third year economics of poverty course this summer, and that was amazing. I really enjoyed that. So you learn something different teaching every class.
Very cool. It's very, very cool. So relating to kind of like teaching these large groups of students, I was wondering how you develop those skills to learn how to communicate with such large groups of people so well.
Just trial and error, mostly. I think any communication starts with knowing your audience. So knowing who you're trying to talk to. And to be honest, this I think goes back to, as I said, I was not a strong first year student, a strong undergrad student. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I changed programs multiple times. And so I can empathize. I know that students in the audience. And so part of it is knowing, okay, we have students like that in the audience. We have students who really want to be in business and they're nervous about getting into co-op. We have students who are trying to get into economics or trying to get into business, and they're worried about their grade for totally different reasons. And so I think step one of teaching anything is knowing your audience. The only challenge of something like first year economics is your audience is so varied, it's so big that you sort of have to take all of that into account. And it's trying to find parts of each lecture which appeal to different people. So one of the things that I've tried to do is the top end students in the class who are doing really well, they've done economics before, they're strong math students or something. I'll try and have one clicker question or a learning catalytics question during the lecture that they would find challenging, right? I don't need to challenge them the whole way, because if I challenge that top student the whole way, I'll lose everybody else, okay? And at the same time, I'm trying to say, okay, for the student who's struggling a little bit, that's okay, you're supposed to struggle right now. And we'll get you to where you need to be by the first test, and then we'll still have the rest of the term to work you forward. So I think it's a matter of sort of recognizing who that audience is and teaching to them. And so the big challenge of teaching a large class is trying to hit 6 different audiences at once. And that's just trial and error. So with that, I really like the feedback I get from students. If students are bored, I like it when they tell me they're bored. Because if they don't tell me, I don't know. And if students tell me they're bored, okay, I'm missing that group of people. Or if students are saying, this is too hard, I don't understand what's going on. Okay, I'm missing somebody as I go through. And so that's one of the reasons I try and sort of talk to as many students as I can to try and figure out, okay, am I missing anybody today? Have I missed a group as we go through, that kind of thing.
Yeah, that feedback piece is huge. And it's awesome that you're looking for that and seeking it out to try and make sure you're hitting the right.
It's one of the interesting things as opposed to in-person classes, remote classes. So the EC120 chat function. So I have Zoom calls with all 3 sections are generally between 500 and 600 people attending each time. And the chat function just flows. Like there's just comments coming in constantly. Some of them are on point. Some of them are probably not appropriate. I call out the ones I see. But I get a really good feature. And so the way I actually explained it to somebody, it's like everybody in class is whispering to each other like they normally do in a classroom, except I can see everything they're talking about. And so when students are bored, they're saying so. When students, it's not good sometimes, but when students see a question from another student that they think is a stupid question, they say so in the chat, which I think is a little unfair. And so I've actually had to call that out and say, no, that's a good question. And I'll go ahead and answer it. But it gives me an idea of what people are thinking as we go through, which has actually been interesting. I mean, there's a whole other chat going on WhatsApp or on something else where they're talking to each other that I don't see. And I assume they're complaining, but the stuff in the chat is enough for me to get a good feel for the way things are going.
Yeah, for sure. I actually didn't even, I guess, like conceptualize how those classes would work, because all my classes are about 60 people, 80 people max on Zoom. So having 100 plus, yes, I could see that getting a little bit hectic.
So I had 100 in a class in the summer. It's the 500 to 600, which has been interesting. But so what I've done is I've got 2, for each of my 3 sections, I have 2 undergrad economics students acting as instructional assistants just to moderate the chat. They answer questions in the chat that they can. Every once in a while, they'll push a question to me to answer. If I've missed one, for example, that I really should answer, they'll push me a question. But they're answering a lot of the sort of administrative type questions as we go in the chat, which has been really useful. So
that's awesome. Yeah. So, question about maybe a less important piece of feedback. I'm assuming you've heard of Rate My Prof.
I have.
Okay. So I would like you to guess what your rating out of 5 is on Rate My Prof.
I know what my evaluations are, Laurier. I'm assuming it's pretty good.
It's good. It's good.
And I'm going to be honest. Rate My Prof is a thing, and it's fine. I'll be honest. It's the source of feedback I actually look for is out of the evaluations that we do at Laurier, the comments that I get. So not the numbers. The numbers are fine. one of the things that I always temper things with, and I mean, Laurier doesn't like me to say this, but it's kind of the same as the student satisfaction metric that Laurier always talks about. The people answering that question have no experience with anything else. 90% of the students in my first year economics class, this is their first class ever. It's the first time they don't know whether I'm good or bad. They haven't got the comparison. So, but I really do like the comments that I get. So I really do like so especially in the Laurier one where it's anonymous comments, I get some really interesting things coming back to me, which is fine.
That's awesome. I actually had not been on Rate My Prof until I was like looking you up and doing some research. Yeah. 96% of the people on Rate My Prof would take your course again. So I guess that's like in addition to the profession.
To be clear, 96% of them would have to take my course because they want to be in business or economics. But
you have no choice. You must.
I have a captive audience there. It's good.
That's awesome. Do you have a favorite course to teach?
No. I find the content, for example, of EC 140 more interesting than EC 120, but I like teaching first. So that's a trade-off. But I've also taught, so when I started at Laurier, I taught a graduate course in the Balsley School of International Affairs on, as a master's level course on economic development and human security. It was an awesome course to teach. I'd teach a class of sort of 8 or 9 people each time. They'd work through papers. We'd do it, and it was just a totally different experience. And I love teaching that. I taught the economics of poverty course this summer, and it's funny. I taught it 2 years ago, and I came out of it thinking I didn't really enjoy teaching that. It was a bit of a grind. I didn't enjoy it that much. I taught it this summer, and it was amazing. I love teaching it. In part, there was a lot of topical content in the economics of poverty course. It was actually the day after the George Floyd killing erupted everything. I came on and I said, you know what, I can't teach today. Like I can't do this. So we're going to talk about poverty and racial discrepancies in poverty rates in the US and in Canada. And that's what we're going to talk about for 80 minutes. And the students just went with me on that. And it was really nice. It was a nice way to do that. And so it was really good to be able to teach that course at that time. So no, I just like teaching. I actually like teaching. So I changed. So one of the things, I don't know whether people know this or not. When I started at Laurier, I was in a regular faculty member position. About 7 years ago now, I applied for and switched into what's called a professional teaching position, which actually means I teach more than I would otherwise and downplays my research a little bit professional. And I did that because I really enjoy teaching. And I actually enjoy the administration side of things too. But this put me in front of the classroom more often, which has been great.
That's great. And that kind of segues perfectly into your research, because there's something that I've been very curious about, how just in general research is conducted. And I did a little bit of research, no pun, for your, like what you've been working on. So it says here, the first element of your research considers the effects of institutional development, which I immediately looked up, on the evolution of social norms, with trust and cooperation as the key current focus. So institutional development meaning like health systems and education systems?
In general, at least in theory, yes. So what I'm interested in on a research perspective is how do different institutions, so by institutions here we mean, so in one context I have a paper where I'm looking specifically at contracting, legal systems and contracting systems, which people have looked at in economics many times over the last, 50 or 60 years, and how those interact with the development of things like trust. So there's research on different countries around the world on, do people trust each other? And there's huge variations around the world of, like, if you're asked, do you trust your neighbors? People in different parts of the world answer that question very differently. And what I was interested in is, does that connect to other parts of the institutional structure, whether it's tax and transfer systems and inequality and those sorts of things? Does it relate to ethnic diversity or religious diversity and those sorts of things? And does it relate to sort of legal norms and social constructions? I don't spend as much time on research as I did when I started as a faculty member. My research, has, to be completely honest, has tailed off somewhat. And but I'm still really interested in those kinds of questions of how, particularly the formal parts of our social structures, so the formal rules of how we exist as a society, and the informal side, how they fit together. So just as an example of this, a connection between the formal and informal side that's obviously topical is, does the provincial government go out and try and severely enforce the COVID-19 bylaws with fines and all sorts of things? Or do they try and do it with social pressure and get people to have that be a much more informal structure? And I think, I mean, to be honest, the different parts of the province have dealt with this slightly differently. Different parts of the country have definitely dealt with it differently. But it's that connection between sort of the formal rules of a government and then the informal structure of society, which has got an interesting interplay there that I find fascinating.
So just kind of like piggybacking off of that question, I was wondering, how do you guys, or like for you specifically, how do you conduct this research? How do you get your data? Like, where does that come from?
So most of my data, all of my data has been made freely available. So most statistical agencies out there, whether in Canada or the US or countries around the world, they release a lot of data publicly. And so I've used some of that data. There's a group called the Demographic and Health Surveys, which actually comes out of the US AIDS, USAID, which is the US aid industry. And they have a lot of publicly available data. Not publicly available, it's free, you have to ask for it. As long as you're doing something relevant, and as long as you have to sign off on some privacy stuff and stuff, you can get access to this data that I used for looking at countries in Africa to look at access to clean drinking water and that kind of thing. And so that's where that's where I found data. So there's hundreds and thousands of data, there's thousands, millions of data sources out there, and it's a matter of trying to figure out where you find it. The reality is, once you get into an academic field, normally sort of there's whole areas of an academic field that use very similar data sources. And so you use the same data source that someone else used on a related paper, and that's how you sort of find your way into things. And I've used that demographic and health survey data in the poverty course that I've taught. I've used it in the international policy course that I've taught. And so we use those all the time. Statistics Canada is pretty good at releasing data. The US Census Bureau is amazing at releasing data. And so we can get data from all over the world. And then there's another survey called the World Values Survey, which again, they release all their data publicly. And this is where you see differences in trust across countries around the world.
Very cool. Okay, yeah, I learned something new today. That's awesome. I did not know where it was pulled from. But so I actually have a question from Laurier Economics Club. My friend Mark O'Grady helped me out with this. So there was an article that you recently posted comparing the impacts of 9/11 to COVID. So specifically, you note that the 9/11 was an uncertain event, whereas COVID is a virus that can be modeled, whether it be through the spread of the virus or the development of a vaccine. So I was wondering if you could explain the economic relevance of uncertainty versus risk.
Ooh, okay, that's a great question. So congratulations to Mark for bringing that back to a really important question. But so the way economists talk about risk and uncertainty is different. Risk is something that we can model. We have an idea of the likelihood of a vaccine, because we've seen other diseases of similar nature, and we've seen the time it takes to get to a vaccine. We've seen the ease with which that's done. So we have some idea that we were going to have that happen. Contrast to something like 9/11, the odds that there's a terrorist attack on New York City, I mean, somebody might have been doing that, but it's a really difficult event to model, right? So this actually links to Nassim Taleb's comments about sort of black swans. And so events that you don't know how to expect, that you can't model, are really difficult to manage around in a financial sense and in any other sense. And that's the uncertainty side as opposed to the risk side. Risk primarily falls into things, okay, we can anticipate what the likelihood is of different events. Uncertainty is, we don't know, we have no idea. And preparing yourself for uncertainty is really hard. Preparing yourself for risk is actually relatively straightforward. There's all kinds of mechanisms to do that. One of the challenges, I think, and this goes beyond, this is beyond economics, just this particular example is, to be prepared for things is about, to some extent, is about shifting things from uncertainty to risk. Okay, so there's some likelihood when I'm teaching that my Zoom call is going to collapse. Okay, but I can try and figure out what that likelihood is, and I can spend some time, and that shifts it towards a risk scenario. There's other things that are going to happen during class, and it's about, and so that's a case where it's about preparing people for the fact that something weird is going to happen, and we're all just going to be fine coming out of it. I can't predict what the likelihood is that something's going to happen during class, but so that's where I try and build a lot of trust for students, for example, that if something happens, it'll get dealt with fairly. I don't know whether it's going to happen. I don't know if it's going to happen. I can't really control it. If something happens, we'll deal with it fairly. And so we can try and eliminate some of that uncertainty. I mean, it's not eliminating the uncertainty. The uncertainty is there, but we're giving people an idea of how we're going to deal with that uncertainty. Okay. And so, and I think this is the biggest challenge. So 9/11 to COVID, 9/11 was a one-time event, right? It was a one-time event, and it spawned all kinds of follow-on effects, some of which have been useful, some of which are not. People have talked about the concept of security theater that came out of 9/11. We have a lot of security that isn't actually doing a lot post 9/11. And to be honest, with COVID, we have the same thing. There's some health theater that's going on. Okay. There's people walking in the middle of nowhere by themselves wearing a mask. I mean, at that point, you're not helping anybody. Wearing a mask when you're around people, that's not theater, that's actually helping. But I think it's a matter of how we think about different actions that will help reduce risk, because especially with COVID, we have a pretty good idea of how it works. We have a pretty good idea at this point of who's getting sick, who's not getting sick. Not perfect, and to be honest, everybody has a chance of getting sick, but we kind of know what those probabilities are. And so you've moved out of uncertainty into risk.
Right. And yeah, super interesting kind of your point on preparation and kind of having these contingency plans. A follow-up question to that.
If I can follow up, I'm going to follow up.
Go ahead.
So what part of it is, and this goes back to my research on formal versus informal institutions. It's really easy to come up with formal institutions to deal with risk because you know those are coming. It's the uncertain activities where social norms and informal structures, societal structures that are not rules, they're not written down, but the fact that people trust each other is really important in situations of uncertainty. And so that's where societies respond differently to different types of events, whether it's risk or uncertainty.
So in terms of like situations of risk where you have these like formalized institutions, what's the relationship between economists and, say, the government? So like how would economists convince policymakers to act on their research in terms of like risk or, say, COVID?
So, I mean, there's a couple of ways. First of all, there are economists in government. So Jean-Yves Duclos is one of the ministers for the federal government, and he's an amazing economist. He came out of the University of Laval, and he's been teaching at the University of Laval for decades. And he's awesome. He's done lots of research on poverty, and he went into the government to work on that kind of stuff. So there's that direction. There's lots of economists. Tammy Sherrill is one of the economists at Laurier who presents to parliamentary committees on a regular basis. So we tell them, so we write research, but in some of us find ourselves in positions where we actually talk directly to the government, and they ask for advice from academic economists, from professional economists. I'm thinking Pierre Siklos is one of the economists in the Laurier department who is on an advisory committee to the Bank of Canada. So academic economists can get directly into that. And then one step back from that is economists, I mean, like most other academic researchers, we write a lot of research. Some of us write more than others. And that research makes its way to government, often not directly. So the Minister of Health is not necessarily reading the health economics paper that would be written, but the Deputy Minister of Health might be, or that person, the person who works for them. And so it's about influencing that sort of bureaucratic structure of if the bureaucrats know something, the minister will know it at some point. And so it's about that research actually gets funneled through the bureaucracy. And the bureaucracy in Canada is incredibly effective at passing information forward in general. It's one of the things about the Canadian bureaucracy tends to stick from election to election, whereas the US bureaucracy turns over a lot. The US bureaucracy it's huge, it's much bigger. So it's just a bit of a different animal, but the Canadian bureaucracy is pretty effective at keeping things moving.
Interesting. I didn't know that we had some academic economists like speaking
Yep.
to Parliament. Like that's
We,
very, very cool.
we have economists. We have, and I mean, I mentioned two, but there are more. Like in our department, there would be people who would talk on issues of health economics, on issues to do with taxation, tax policy, environmental policy. And yeah, no, academic economists are actually very well connected to government. I think probably more so than some of our colleagues in other areas of social science who wish they were as connected to the economists don't have a problem generally getting people to engage with what we're talking about. And to be honest, if they don't, then there's lots of economists on Twitter who will make known what the results of their research are on Twitter. So
they'll let it be known. That's awesome.
They do.
Awesome. So coming near the end of our chat, I was wondering if you'd be okay with doing a little lightning round or just fire off some questions to you.
I will try.
Cool. So first question, what is your biggest pet peeve?
Is this question going to be on the test?
Well.
that is my biggest pet peeve always. Because the answer is if I think it's interesting enough to talk about, then if I think it's interesting enough to talk about, then it's interesting enough to be put on a test.
Good. That's a good logic behind it. I like that. What is the best piece of advice you've received?
I'm struggling with that one. I mean, I'm coming down to something like do something you enjoy. But yeah.
No, that's fair. That's fair. What motivates Ken Jackson?
To be honest, and this sounds kind of corny, but helping people. I really enjoy helping someone figure out, where they want to go, what they want to do. Whether that's within a course or more generally, if I can help someone get somewhere, that really does motivate me.
Perfect. What is your favorite aspect of Laurier?
Oh, the student involvement for sure. The student engagement in all kinds of things on campus. I'm gonna be honest, and again, the university doesn't like me saying this either, but the student engagement of whether it's St. Patrick's Day or homecoming normally, hopefully not this year, I actually think is a positive. It's an engagement of students on campus that is not negative as long as it's done right. So I think that's my favorite thing about Laurier.
That's awesome. Wow. I don't think I've heard a prof say it in that light, which is cool. It definitely the student involvement across the board, I think, is what drives people loving this school so much. And especially my group of friends, whether it be celebrating HOCO or getting involved in all these student initiatives, there's just so much going on and so many ways to meet new people and learn new skills. So
I think that's right.
100%. Okay, so last one for you. What is one message that you want Laurier or just, I guess, university or college students to hear right now?
It's going to be okay. It's to be honest, I've been saying this all year. The best place to be right now is in school. The person who's 23 who graduated last year and is now trying to find a job, that's hard. Okay, that's a really hard place to be, and there's all kinds of economic research that's a really difficult place to be. To be honest, when I'm talking to those students, I'm saying you might want to go back to grad school because that would be a safe way to go. For a student, whether they're in grade 11 or 12, moving forward to university is working. Okay, university and to be honest, it's a really safe place to be right now, and so everything's going to be okay. So one of the things that I actually have to keep saying when I teach first year economics this year is you're having the same problems people have every year. It's not that everybody's struggling to get logged into the MyLab system, the online homework system. Everybody's struggling with schedules and all kinds of things, getting all the quizzes done on time, or just learning the content. And I keep saying these are exactly the same questions I get every year. It's not because we're remote. It's not because you're in person. It's because this is what university is. It's not trivial. And so I think my message to, whether it's high school students or university students right now is it's going to be okay. We just keep moving forward. Everything's going to be fine.
Perfect. That's a great piece of advice. And I hope everyone listening just took a big, deep breath because definitely need it.
And wear a mask.
And wear a mask. That is huge. Yes. That's awesome. Thank you so much, Ken. I really appreciate you taking the time to sit down and chat. I learned a lot just about your research and how research is conducted. Also just about economics and how I guess wide ranging it is. Even though I did learn this in 120, 140, I promise.
Of course.
But no, I really appreciate you coming on, Ken. Thanks so much.
Thanks a lot for having me. I enjoyed it.